Really enjoy reading everything that Wandile Sihlobo has to write, sometimes on the Daily Maverick, sometimes on Business Day and other platforms as well. And in a recent article, he wrote about the more than 2 million hectares of land which the government has taken into its portfolio, as it were, and acquired through the proactive land acquisition strategy, and which are being leased on short-term leases, never released to beneficiaries with title deeds or long-term tradable leases. Wandile Sihlobo, agricultural economist, just returned from the Karoo, where, Wandile, good afternoon, you saw a couple of these farms where quite clearly capable farmers are tearing their hair out because they can't use their land as collateral to grow their businesses.
Good afternoon, John. Thanks for having me on. Indeed, John, this is a challenge. In the Karoo region, which I spent some time last week visiting various farmers and agribusinesses, it gives us a sense of the bigger picture that is there in South Africa as a challenge for new entrant farmers in the sector and those that desire to one day commercialize and gain scale. A number of these colleagues have had a great fortune of benefiting on land reform, but not only just through owning land, but short-term leases that are there. For some, they even go to about 30 years, and the others are 5 years, but without a full transfer of title deeds or tradable leases or a proper support financially at which they could develop these farms. What one sees is really a state of a decay in a number of these farms. And I think when you consider the bigger picture of South Africa, problems of poverty, unemployment, and the potential that agriculture could contribute, you would assume that we can utilize and really put at capacity any available resources so that we can achieve that. And I think that was the urgency behind putting that piece out in the Daily Maverick.
And Wandile, I mean, are there reasons which can be debated but have some merit to them as to why the government has focused on relatively short-term leases rather than handing over title deeds or long-term leases, 50-year leases, 100-year leases that can be traded? Is there some merit in that approach?
I think, John, we must assist to remind the listeners very quickly here about what we are dealing with, because the conversation that we are having at this point really speaks to the land reform policy in South Africa, which has about 3 layers. One being the story of land redistribution. Second one, restitution, where people can claim where their families once had access, and then they can either be compensated financially or return back to that land. And the third aspect of our land reform, which is the third leg, is land tenure, which deals with securing the rights or improving the rights of individuals in certain pieces of land at a very high level, that these are the pathways to land reform in South Africa. What we are talking about now is a certain portion that belongs under land redistribution. Over time, the South African government has acquired land, and before 2006, some of the land that was acquired on redistribution was transferred to people in a whole range of programs, but broadly with title deeds. The problem began on this one in around about 2006, where we moved and we put in place this policy, which is called proactive land acquisition strategy, where the state was saying, look, we can acquire this land, lease it on to people with an assumption that there will be a proper post-transfer support. We all know then that after that process, there were certain changes in government and certain changes in various ministries, and the functioning of the land reform has really taken a hit. And I think no one has better documented that than people like Thembeka Ngcukaitobi in his wonderful book, Land Matters, where he deals with corruption and inefficiencies and a whole range of things that have been there. But I think we all know and appreciate that history as South Africans. Now that we are today under the GNU, we should then be thinking of saying, okay, we do have this resource, not yet transferred to people, but what can we do now? Because in our numbers at Actors and Stellenbosch University, we think that land is valued at somewhere on around about 12 billion rands or so. So we should be thinking then of saying, okay, let's put it in full productive use, transfer what you can transfer so that people can attract some of the capital from outside to develop it, but select the beneficiaries appropriately. and also know what exactly is going to happen on that. And I think the ministries that we have now, the Department of Land Affairs and Rural Development and the separation with agriculture, provides that pathway for the discussion to begin.
What are the potential downsides? I mean, you put a couple of steps in there. The beneficiaries must be identified appropriately. That's sometimes easier said than done. But what are the downsides of a large-scale transfer of currently state-owned, relatively short-term leased land being handed over to allow people to scale up should they want to scale up? Borrow money so they can invest in machinery, borrow money so they can buy the neighboring farm, so they can add more pasture, more grazing, whatever the case may be. Are there risks which have to be taken seriously into account which might make such an enterprise, when you look back with hindsight, go, oh dear, why did we do that?
I think, John, we can both appreciate the complexity of the South African society. Each region tends to differ with the other. There's social construct, there's cultural dimensions. So there's always those difficulties that are there. But I think if we take a step back and we ask ourselves to say, what are we doing here? I think, John, we would agree that there are two things that we need to balance, which is restorative justice, given the history of South Africa. And the other point that we need to balance with is this story of the economic growth and economic potential that is needed, and the economic potential that is there that we can actually explore. So when we're thinking about transferring these, we necessarily not saying give people title deeds, but you need to give someone something that is more secure, they can use to raise capital. You can decide it's title deeds or long-term tradable lease. But I think even that alone is not sufficient, because then there's a whole range of things that are needed to ensure that a farm is working appropriately and producing and creating value and able to create jobs, which is why when you embark on this, it will be important to calibrate it in a way, one, where you can work with the Land Bank and the Department of Agriculture to ensure that there is a blended finance leg that is available to assist on this. Fortunately, that has already been established. The blended finance is there at the Land Bank and Department of Agriculture.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, you haven't finished, yeah?
Yes, the second aspect, which is the last, is working with the commodity associations, which then would assist you in selecting appropriately the beneficiaries, but also thinking thoroughly about what is to be produced in those areas, so we can pursue this in a more comprehensive way.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Wandile Sihlobo, an agricultural economist.